Study Session 5. Two notable Roman educators. Introduction. Of the various philosophers who have contributed to the development of Roman education in later years, Cicero and Quintilian were about the most important, and with them, the long process of the Hellenization of the ancient world began. This study session will therefore expose you to these two notable Roman educators. Specifically, you examine their major contributions to educational ideas in the course of the study. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to discuss the relevance of Cicero educational ideas to modern times and highlight the views of Quintilian to corporal punishments. Cicero. Marcus Tullius Cicero, one of the leading Roman orators and statesmen, was born in 106 BC. He died in 43 BC. He was perhaps the greatest of the Roman orators, as well as the principal writer in Rome's golden age of literature. Though he rejected a Latin education in favor of Greek in his youth, he, however, became a master of the Latin language. He was one of the greatest influences on educational theory in the Roman state, when the Republican was influenced by the Hellenistic civilization. His books also provided the ideal for the education of the Middle Ages, particularly of the classical or grammarian type of education. Educational ideas of Cicero. Cicero's main educational ideas were set forth in the book The Orator. In this book, he outlined his conception of the skills of rhetoric and oratory necessary for the development of the public leader or orator. It was felt at that time that the ability to speak and to persuade others was of the greatest importance in professional and public life. Cicero felt that the orator should have a well-rounded education in what would now be called the liberal arts. The orator should also be a man of wide practical experience in order to provide a sound basis for his philosophy. The emphasis was a practical one rather than theoretical. Some of the subjects Cicero listed in the humanities are sometimes vague, but they included grammar, that is, classical literature, rhetoric, logic, geometry, astronomy, music, physics, history, civil law, and philosophy. Cicero constantly stressed the point that the purpose of pursuing these subjects was not simply for intellectual or spiritual exercise, but for the development of skills in public life. His major focus of education was on the art of leadership in public life. Cicero believed that all men who aspire to leadership in society must have a basic liberal arts education designed to develop them completely. Such a person must be an individual thoroughly grounded in every branch of useful knowledge, including philosophy, mathematics in all its branches, physics, history, music, grammar, logic, and morals. Cicero believed that a leader is a man with obligation to society. This necessitates his being a good man, someone imbued with the highest morality of the age. He must be honest, public-minded, devoted to the good of the people, unselfish, and pure in mind and body. He must represent the best in his times. His education and training from birth must develop him in tradition, giving him a clear moral sense of right and justice, and equip him with the best that learning has to offer. Cicero's thinking was truly pragmatic. Experience was for him a master teacher. Cicero left to posterity purity in the use of Latin, which has been unexcelled, a model for orators throughout the ages, and the ideal for champions of the right. He, however, died a disappointed and bitter man. Marcus Fabius Quintilian, circa 35 to 95 AD. Born in Spain of Roman parentage in about AD 35, Quintilian lived in the 1st century AD. After training as a lawyer in Rome, he returned to Spain for a short time, and then in AD 68, he came back to Rome. Quintilian is noted for his knowledge of rhetoric. In about AD 90, he wrote his major work, The Training of an Orator. His reputation as a teacher of rhetoric in Rome made the Emperor Vespasian to employ him in the state chair of rhetoric on a salary of approximately 1,600 per annum. In his book, Quintilian suggested that the good orator must be a wise and good person, but not necessarily articulate. The process of having such a good person through education must begin right from infancy. Educational ideas of Quintilian. Generally, Quintilian did not believe that education could be entrusted to teacher at home. He contended that the child should be taken out of the family and put in the school, where contact will influence the character of the young learner. He further argued that young children should be taught by the teachers. He insisted on the importance of studying the child amidst the teachers. This theory seems to be in line with Rousseau's advocacy of the child-centered education, and a good basis for streaming in some of our modern educational institutions, particularly at post-primary level. Quintilian also advocated the play method of teaching. He said that under the direction of the teacher, pupils should be encouraged to put in self-effort in their learning. He preached the idea of individuality in learning. This means that children should be allowed to progress at their own individual rates. Greek, which he regarded as a sound language, should be taught at the early stage of education, just as the British, our colonial masters, were teaching Latin to their children in the very same way we today teach English to our children in the nursery and primary schools. Being a practicing teacher himself, Quintilian included a number of teaching techniques in his educational theories. He suggested that teachers should not hasten their pupils in learning how to read, and that there should be a happy, playful, competitive spirit in the class. On corporal punishment, Quintilian raised objection on the following grounds. 1. It is a negative form of discipline because the fear which it generates cannot effectively compel a child to learn. 2. It might not be effective and useful. Reflection. In conclusion, the Romans synthesized two world cultures, Greek and Roman, in much the same way as we in Nigeria, as in other parts of Africa, synthesized British and Nigerian culture. The Romans, following their infiltration into Europe, particularly into Britain by Julius Caesar in AD 55, gradually introduced Greco-Roman civilization into Europe, where Greek and Latin became twin languages of civilization. The outstanding Roman thinker in education in the early period of the empire was the teacher and orator Quintilian. His views on education in this period are important because, like those of Cicero, they reveal the highest ideal of Roman education that is seldom achieved. And also, because there are certain aspects of it which are very modern in form, they were rediscovered during the Renaissance when they became an important source for the ideas of certain individualistic humanist educators. In his most important book, Institutes of Oratory, Quintilian pictured the orator in somewhat the same way as Cicero did, as a well-rounded man of affairs or public leader. The orator's role of leadership in public policy should rest not only upon his ability to speak, but upon his intellectual background and knowledge, and upon the integrity of his personality or character. Quintilian sounded strangely like modern educators when he talked about the necessity for teachers to take into account the different individual capacities of boys. He not only felt that the majority of boys were capable of being educated, but that there ought to be a possible choice of studies in order to develop the special talents of each individual. He recommended in ways strangely predictive of some ideas of Froebel and others in the early modern period that plays and games should be used for relaxation and to stimulate interest. He suggested competition and awards as a basis for motivation, rather than corporal punishments. However, in spite of the modern quality of his emphasis upon recreational pursuits and material awards, Quintilian did stress memory and used moralizing as a main basis for motivation. One interesting thing, in line with the later development of public education, was that he felt that group or class instruction was preferable to individual tutoring, even though the parents could well afford a private tutor. He was able to see that there were certain things which the boy learned in the class, but which he could not learn alone. Friendship and the cross-fertilization of ideas through class discussion would make learning in classes superior in its advantages to private tutoring. Some of the arguments against class teaching were that the association with others might hurt the morals of the boys. Also, the teacher might not be able to be fair to all individuals. Quintilian argued, however, that if the classes of the schools were not unduly large, the teacher would be able to give his attention to individual pupils. Quintilian went into much greater detail on the education curriculum and methods that did Cicero. Although, with the exception of the points above mentioned, his recommendations for the curriculum were not too greatly different from those of Cicero. Very young children in the elementary school, after instruction in reading and writing, will go on into grammar school education, that is secondary, with the emphasis upon grammar composition and the reading of the outstanding Latin poets. Quintilian, like Cicero, wanted music, but to train the voice as the basis for speaking and also as a part of singing the lyrics. He did stress mathematics and a minimal amount of physical education in order to provide for the development of those body skills necessary in speaking. Like Cicero and the other Romans, Quintilian did not strongly emphasize the study of philosophy. Romans tended to be concerned about practical affairs and to develop their individual ideas out of experience. Quintilian, and to some extent Cicero, with all of his concepts of the classical and literary nature of education, tried to tie education fairly close to life's affair. After their time, education moved farther away from life, and when the ideas were revived in the later Middle Ages, the close relationship of education to culture, as they had recommended, was quite forgotten by their imitators. Study session summary. In this study session, we examine the contributions of Cicero and Quintilian to education. Cicero was one of the leading Roman orators and statesmen. He was well trained in Greek rhetoric and philosophy. His main educational ideas were set forth in the book The Orator. He believed that all men who aspire to leadership in society must have a basic liberal arts education. A leader to him is a man with obligation to his society. Hence, he should be a good person and someone imbued with highest morality. He should be honest, public-minded, selfless, and pure in mind and body. Quintilian, AD 35 to 95, contributed significantly to the direction of schooling both in the Roman period and ever since. He realized the importance of schooling during the early years and believed that children learn best when encouraged by praise and positive models. He bitterly opposed the harsh treatment used by some of his contemporaries. He strongly believed that the child's individual needs and interests should be taken into account when prescribing the curriculum for each individual. Quintilian held that an educated person, an orator, should possess the quality of being a good moral person, a master of liberal arts, and should be a good speaker. End of study session 5. Thank you for listening.